Hello and welcome back to our Epiphany series on the book of Revelation, wherein we are talking about how the book of Revelation reveals the true divinity of Jesus, as well as calls us to follow the nonviolent way of Jesus as part of the citizens of the kingdom of heaven. We're going to be in Revelation chapter 4 today, and we're only going to be looking at the first 4 verses. After all, there's only 11 verses in Revelation chapter 4, but we're still going to split this up into 2 videos to fill up the days that mark the time from Epiphany to Ash Wednesday, which happened to be 43. And so we're going to be in Revelation chapter 4 and verse 1. Let's read. After these things, I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard, like the sound of a trumpet speaking with me, said, "Come up here, and I'll show you what must take place after these things." All right, so we're starting a new vision. We're starting a new section in the book of Revelation. Chapters 1 through 3 compose the vision of the 7 churches. Chapters 4 and following, there's an interlude, of course, in chapter 7. But when we get to chapter 8, then we start the vision of we're in the vision of the 7 scrolls, 7 seals, and then we're in the vision of the 7 trumpets from 8 through 11. And so there's these sections within Revelation that sometimes are clear cut, sometimes they overlap, and it's really not something that we have to pay too much attention to. It just sort of helps us guide us through the book. So he says, after these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. So he's being invited into the throne room in heaven to witness something take place on the spiritual level that he wouldn't otherwise be able to see on the physical level. And he notices that the first voice that he hears is like the sound of a trumpet. Now, this is exactly what is said earlier in Revelation chapter 1 and in verse 10. He was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. He heard a voice behind him that sounds like a loud trumpet. The loud trumpet may maybe indicate a call to arms. The loud trumpet may be to indicate that a king is arriving. Maybe a loud trumpet is to indicate the regathering of Israel, like in Isaiah chapter 27, 12 and 13, I think, echoed in Matthew 24, 29 to 31. The point is that it's loud, it's attention-getting, and John is invited up into heaven to see the things that would take place. And so when he says that he would see the things that would take place, again, that reminds us of verse 11 in chapter 1, where Jesus tells John to write down the things that he sees. And then finally in Revelation chapter 1 and verse 19, write the things which he has seen, the things which are, and the things which will take place after these things. Now, whether this is talking about chronological time, that the events in Revelation happen one after the other, is yet for us to determine. We'll actually really get into that discussion in chapter 12. What we're going to just say at this point is these visions are happening sequentially, and he's writing them down as he sees them in the order that he sees them. In each vision, we're turning the gem just a little bit, getting a different angle, getting a different insight into one overarching story. So immediately, he says in verse 2, I was in the Spirit, again, echoing the language from chapter 1, and behold, a throne was standing in heaven, and one sitting on the throne. Now, who is this sitting on the throne? When we think back to Daniel 7, we might be a little bit confused because it's the Ancient Days that's on the throne, but then the imagery used to describe Jesus in Revelation chapter 1 is that of the Ancient of Days. So who is the one sitting on the throne? Is this Jesus? Is this, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords? Is this God? What's going on? Well, he goes on to describe in verse 3, he who was sitting was like a jasper stone and a sardius in appearance, and there was a rainbow around the throne like an emerald in appearance. So we have all these flashing colors and lights, a beautiful picture. It is something that it invokes imagery of light refracting, of something that's maybe quite a bit difficult to put our hand on. Notice he says it's like this, it's like this, it's like this. And so again, it's not that there's actual jasper or there's actual sardius, this red stone, red beautiful stone. It's not like it's actually emerald, but it looks like it, right? It has the appearance of that. And then we see in verse 4, around the throne were 24 thrones. And upon the thrones I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white garments and golden crowns on their heads. Okay, so here, maybe one thing to keep in mind, again, as we read Revelation, is we're not approaching this with a decoder ring trying to find one-to-one explanations for every sign we come across. And this here is a great example. When you have this idea of this throne in the middle, one sitting on the throne, and then 24 elders around the throne, on their own thrones with golden crowns wearing white, we might immediately jump into an interpretation that says, 24 elders. Well, there's 12 apostles and there's 12 patriarchs, sons of Israel. Therefore, this must encapsulate all the leaders from the Old Testament, all the leaders from the New Testament. Okay, maybe so. Questions we might raise about that interpretation, though, is what do you do with the absence of Dan later on in the list of the tribes within the book of Revelation? What do you do with Judas? Is Judas among the 12 that are counted in this 20, this two groups of 12 and this 24? Or is it Matthias? And if so, what about the Apostle Paul? And so there's questions that come up about the identity of these 24 elders that aren't really, they don't really lend themselves to a literal interpretation. And so what should we do instead? Well, kind of like with the jasper and the sardius and the emerald and the rainbow in verse 3, we're really going to just close our eyes and imagine ourselves again in a lantern-lit room in Ephesus or in Thyatira, and a young man comes bursting into the room during our gathering, holding scrolls in his arms, and he lays them out on the table before us, and using the light of a lantern, he's reading us the book of Revelation all at once. Remember Revelation chapter 1, blessed is he who reads and those who hear. And as we're reading, we're not going, oh, emerald, that's right. Let me take out my book. Yes. Oh, emerald represents this. And jasper, that represents, and he's pulling out our theological dictionary, Instead, they're picturing these things in their head as they hear them. And it's the feelings that they get when they picture these things that matter. Like, for example, you're picturing this beautiful throne room scene and you're just struck with awe and you're just struck with wonder. And it's like you're in the room with John and you see these 24 elders and they'll have crowns and you're going, oh, what is that? What's happening here? Is this an election? Is this some kind of divine council? What's going on? And then what happens in the next scene that we're going to talk about in the next video reveals it. They're all casting their crowns before the throne and you're going, oh, that's what happened. That's what happened. These 24 elders with the crowns on their head and the thrones are meant to signify the total sovereignty of God, because they're casting their crowns before him and identifying them as, well, the one who sits 2 to his left must be, John, and the one who sits 7 to his right must be Joseph. That doesn't really matter. The other thing about the 24 elders, and I didn't mention this before, is whoever John is, if John is the apostle, then is he seeing himself around this throne room? And if not, what does it even matter? See, it just kind of gets a bit confusing. And so instead, let's just think about what mental image this invokes within us. One other thing here. Notice that the 24 elders have the blessings promised in chapters 2 and 3. They are sitting on thrones with God. They are ruling with God. They have crowns, like was promised in the crown of life in chapter 2, verse 10, for instance. They're dressed in white, as is discussed in chapter 3 and verse 18. And so they have the blessings associated with being faithful in Revelation chapters 2 and 3. So again, there's that continuity between these texts. If we try to isolate these passages and study them on their own without considering all the texts that come before, we'll miss out on the beautiful intertextuality that John is developing throughout the Revelation. And by the way, we'll also miss out in other books of the Bible too, whether it's the Gospel of John or the book of Romans or 1 Thessalonians or Ephesians. If we just skip around and pick texts out of context, then we'll miss out on the continuity, on the flow, on the intertextuality that exists within books, but also between books of the Bible. And maybe we'll be able to pull some of that out as we get into the following chapters in the book of Revelation and dig more into this wonderful book. Okay, that'll be all for Revelation chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. We'll start back with verse 5 in the next video.